Welcome to part one of my series on mythical identities within the queer community. We're going to start out with probably the best known of the ones that aren't included in the acronym, the ACE community or asexual community. This is the flag associated with them: black, gray, white, and purple. There's a lot of iconography associated with the ACE community, such as cake and garlic bread. The reason for that is tied into what being asexual means, which is that you don't have sexual attraction. And so an early inside joke amongst the asexual community was that you liked cake more than sex or garlic bread more than sex. And so that's where it came from, but it's kind of evolved beyond that. Um, so, really, what being asexual or people who identify with that term is about, it's about uh, lacking sexual attraction, at least in some cases. It is considered to be a spectrum. So we speak about the asexual spectrum or ASPEC, and it includes all sorts of sub identities under the umbrella. So you have things like demisexual people who only feel sexual attraction after they've had an emotional connection with the person first, or the opposite of that. Sometimes you get people who have only sexual attraction when they don't have an emotional connection, and there's lots and lots of different micro labels, and we'll go over some of those later if I'm ambitious enough to keep this going. So, but the asexual community has two facets that make it a little more complex than, say, lesbian or gay communities, in that there are people within the asexual community who embrace the idea of the split model of attraction, where your sexual identity or sexual preference, if you'd like to go that way, is characterize it that way, is separate from your romantic orientation, your romantic identity. And so that's the case for me. While I am aromantic, I don't feel romantic attraction. I don't really identify so much with the term asexual. And so I would still say that I'm part of the A-spec community because I'm egosexual, but that wouldn't be the term that I would use for myself. That said, I am in a lot of different communities that center on the asexual experience, because again, it is a spectrum, and so I have a fairly decent familiarity with people within that community, because I'm part of that community. Just in my own special way, because I've always got to be a little extra, of course. The main thing I think for asexual people is that their sexual orientation, their lack of sexual attraction, in no way implies that they don't have romantic attraction and therefore would like to be married and have a romantic relationship. And some people who identify with the term asexual have fine sexual relationships with their romantic partners, because repulsion of sex is not a requirement for asexuality. It is just a lack of sexual attraction. And so you get people in the community who are sex adverse and don't want to have anything to do with any sort of sexual contact. You have people within the community that are sex averse but like sensual contact, so they have sensual attraction. So they enjoy cuddling and hugging and kissing and all of those things. And then you have people who are just indifferent to that kind of stuff. And so, they may or may not have sex to please a partner, depending on what they want and what their partner wants. And then you have people who actually have a really high libido and enjoy sex a lot, but they just don't have sexual attraction. And let me tell you, that's got to be like one of the stranger identities. I'm sure it is not easy to figure out that you're ace if you have a high libido. So, which, relatable. But we'll get more into that later when we talk about some of the terms that I use for myself. But yeah, there's just a lot of variety in the community. And I think that it's very uh, gratifying that we have that, because there aren't that many people who identify as being a-spec. There really aren't. You know, probably not a higher proportion than there are gay people at the very most, but maybe less than that. We don't know. I mean, it's so hard to say because there's so many people who don't know these terms and who would be culturally, discouraged from embracing them even if they did know the terms. It's very difficult to grow up, in, especially in Western culture, when you don't have the motivation for sex and relationships that your peers seem to, and you don't quite understand it. It's a fairly common thing among ace people, not universal by any means, but a fairly common thing for us to think that what we call allosexuals are lying to themselves because they believe that they've been conditioned to want these things, because every bit of media is so saturated with this desire that feels fake to us because it's just that's not how we experience the world. And so it's definitely a lot of us have this aha moment where it's like, oh, it's not that everyone else is lying to themselves. It's they're literally feeling something that I don't feel. Oh, and let me tell you, that's an intense moment in your life. I think that's part of why our community is so welcoming and broad, of all different variations on a theme, is because we know what it's like, to look at the same world as everyone else and just see it in a completely different way, and to have people feel things that you literally can't understand because you don't feel them yourself. And so it's a wild experience, but it is getting easier in a lot of ways. You actually do see some asexual representation in pop culture. It's not super common. I mean, the pinnacle, I believe, is BoJack Horseman had a openly asexual character who actually dated another openly asexual character, and so there were multiple asexual characters. That's amazing, really. But for every little victory like that, we have things like Jughead. Jughead is canonically asexual and aromantic in the comics. He just does not have any interest in other people sexually or romantically. But when they made their sex soaked, TV show version of it, they had to make him sexy and have relationships and stuff. And it's just like, why? Why did you take him from us? We have so little. Why? But, hopefully it'll become more and more visible. I think the generation after me is really going to bring asexuality and a lot of the micro labels to the fore. For all the people in that generation that are sort of label averse, there's a lot of people who find our community and feel very embraced by it. So we need each other. You need to talk to the people who understand where you're coming from, especially when you're coming from a place that's just so outside of your culture. And I mean, all the time that you're growing up, you're told that the key feature of life is finding that one person who satisfies you romantically and sexually and emotionally and is your partner in all ways. And when you don't want that, at least the same way that everyone else seems to want it, it's really hard to know how to deal with that. It's really hard to realize that there's not anything wrong with you, that there are other people like you, that it's just, you're just another flavor. The menu for a long time was always vanilla, and then they added in chocolate, and then they added in chocolate and vanilla swirl. Well, you know what, baby, you're pina colada, and there's nothing wrong with that, or you're garlic bread, and there's nothing wrong with that. So anyway, that's a very brief, very, very brief introduction into what asexuality is, and the ace spectrum and the aspect community. So I will be back, I hope, and talk at you a bit more, probably about the sort of flip side to that, which is my identity, my most important identity to me, which is a romanticism. So, and it has nothing to do with being smelly, I promise.